My name is Elena Hayes. The night it all started felt smaller than usual. The air in the house had the dry sharpness of lemon polish and something colder, decision. My mother stood in front of the fireplace with her hands folded the way a person folds a verdict into place. My sister sat on the sofa, thumbs scrolling, eyes elsewhere, offering the only kind of mercy she ever granted, indifference. My father huddled by the rug like a man who had learned that silence kept him popular at the price of his own conscience. "We're not funding this circus," my mother said, a line carved neat and final into the warm room. No explanation, no negotiation. My sister looked up only long enough to smirk. "Better luck next time," she said, as if I were a dress that had been returned with a defect. I could have thrown the invitations at her, could have screamed every hurt I'd held back like coins. Instead, I stood very still, and when the word left my mouth it felt like a hinge closing. Understood. They expected that word to mean surrender. They expected me to fold. I left before anyone could repeat it. They saw the back of my coat and thought I would come crawling back like always. They were wrong. Driving home, my hands trembled but I kept my eyes on the road. My phone buzzed with a name I loved, Evan, until the glow on the dash blurred. I didn't answer. There are moments when a person needs the hollow of the road to think, and that night the road was a slow, quiet place where the edges of things made sense. At my apartment the invitations were on the counter in a stack, cream and shining, our names side by side. I picked them up like an archaeologist holding a fragile piece of what could have been and slid the whole pile into a box. It was not rage, not yet. It was a soft, stunned silence that sat like a stone behind my ribs. Evan arrived later with the kind of gentleness that held more courage than my mother's sharpness. He wanted to fix it, go to them, make them see. But I told him, no, this time it was not his fight. This time it had to be mine. That night, as he slept on the couch because leaving me alone felt wrong to both of us, I found the thing I'd buried. An old sketchbook at the bottom of a drawer, corners bent, pages still smelling faintly of pencil and teenage certainty. I traced a sleeve I had once loved and the sensation that rose was not nostalgia, it was recognition. I had been quiet for so long that my quiet had become obedience. The old sketches were a map of a self I'd allowed to be erased. The next morning I called the Ivy House, the venue we'd booked with our own savings. The coordinator's voice had the small, hesitant tone people use when they are about to say something bad. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes. We have a signed cancellation form from your account." My hands went cold. "My what?" "Your signed cancellation," she repeated. "We received it yesterday. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had moved my life out from under my name." I went to Diane Cole before anger had time to burn past shock. Diane read everything the way she read documents, calm, precise, sharp. She held up the cancellation form and didn't need to say the obvious. Her eyes told me, not your handwriting. Then the financial trails began to unfurl like a ribbon. Transfers to a boutique with my sister's name on invoices, payments labeled as renovations on my parents' account routed through the account that used to be mine for the wedding. And later, an uncle's quiet voice on the phone, "There's a trust your grandfather left you, $250,000. It releases if you marry." That number settled in my gut like a stone. The withdrawals, Diane said, came from that very trust. They had been siphoning it for years, Brooks Boutique renovations, renovations on the house, anything to keep appearances. They had cancelled the wedding not because they loved me less or more, but because the audit that would follow my marriage would reveal. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What they had been taking. For the first time, control had a currency. It had a ledger. And the people who had called themselves my family were keeping their comforts by erasing my future. I sat in the dark of my apartment that night and let a few things arrive at me at once. Grief for what had been taken, a slow heat of rage for having been fooled into thinking silence was safety, and a steadiness that felt like a decision being made. I wrote an email to Diane, we're filing the case." The words were simple and clean. I hit send as if closing a door. They would not have me walked back into their life with a watered-down apology. If they wanted to hide their theft, they would have to answer for it. That was not theater. It was the beginning of removing the small, soft comforts they had built their lives on. The road to Ridgefield stretched ahead, a ribbon of wet asphalt glinting under the faint streetlights. Evan drove quietly, the hum of the tires the only sound between us, and I felt my pulse tighten with every mile. That cabin wasn't just a place, it was a memory of my grandfather's secrets, of rooms I'd never entered, of truths he carried alone. Samuel had left instructions, keys, a warning, but nothing about what I would find. We arrived just as the sun was dissolving into mist over the pine trees. The cabin looked untouched by time, as if the decades had passed politely without disturbing it. I stepped forward, key in hand, heart hammering. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and old paper, and the silence wasn't empty, it was waiting. A desk sat against the far wall, drawers locked, a single journal resting on top. I opened it carefully. Samuel's handwriting sprawled across the pages, neat but urgent. He had documented everything: the trust fund, the forged cancellations, my parents' diversion of funds. But deeper than that, he wrote of a larger danger, a distant relative, long estranged, who had been watching, waiting, manipulating the family from the shadows for years. It wasn't just about inheritance. It had been about control, about dominance, about making sure no one escaped without paying. Evan leaned over my shoulder. This is bigger than anyone imagined," he said. I nodded. The threads of my life were suddenly part of a tapestry that extended far beyond my parents' house, beyond their lies. Samuel had risked everything to protect me from a truth no one else dared acknowledge. And now, it was on me to finish what he started. We spent the next days going through Samuel's instructions, checking account ledgers, reconstructing the money trail. It was painstaking, exhausting work, and yet with each recovered document, each corrected transaction, I felt a shift in myself. I wasn't just Elena Hayes anymore. I was someone who could claim her future, quietly, deliberately, without anyone else's permission. Finally, the day came to confront the remaining players. Diane prepared the documents with meticulous care, filing them with evidence that left nothing open to argument. The courtroom felt cold and formal, but I walked unsteady, shoulders squared. My mother, father, and sister sat across from me. Their faces held the same arrogance, the same expectation that I would falter, that I would beg, that I would silence my voice again. But I didn't falter. I didn't beg. Diane presented the case clearly, without emotion, without flourish. The forged signatures, the diverted funds, the misuse of the trust, every fact lined up like a trail of dominoes leading to one inevitable conclusion. Samuel's warnings had guided me, and now the system recognized the truth: their control ended here. When the judge's gavel fell, the verdict was final. All funds were returned, additional damages awarded for fraud and emotional distress. My family's faces changed: shock, disbelief, muted rage, but I didn't need to look at them. I had already walked past what they could take from me. The Ivy House waited a week later, just as it had before. But this time, the archway, the garden lights, the tables draped in white linen, they belonged entirely to me. No one adjusted my veil. No one walked me down the aisle. Evan waited at the end, slightly nervous, slightly crooked tie, perfect smile. Uncle Henry nodded from the second row. Diane gave the rare, small smile she always reserved for truth finally revealed. I walked the aisle with steady steps, reclaiming something that had always been mine. Each footfall was quiet power, a gentle victory over years of manipulation. As I reached Evan, he whispered, "You okay?" And I knew I meant it when I said, "I'm more than okay." We exchanged vows quietly, sincerely, without audience or spectacle, but with every word echoing the lessons we had learned about trust, courage, and ownership of our lives. When the ceremony ended, the music faded, the garden lights flickered, and we slipped away together beneath the oak tree where I had once cried. For a long time, we just stood there, hands intertwined, breathing in freedom that had been won slowly, patiently, deliberately. Weeks later, the calls came, first my mother, then my father, then my sister. Soft apologies, rehearsed regrets, tremors of sympathy. I let the phone buzz. I typed one line. The circus is already full. I set the phone down, poured myself a glass of wine, and returned to my sketches. The lines of fabric and color, once suppressed, now poured freely from my pen. My designs, my visions, my life, finally mine. Freedom was quiet, steady, earned. And if anyone ever asked me what it meant to reclaim yourself after a lifetime of control, I would only smile at the sketches on my desk and whisper to myself, sometimes, the strongest victories come in silence.